AEW has been hit with the injury bug recently. We're going to have an update on the injuries to the likes of Matt Hardy, Bryan Danielson, and others. Plus, a major title match has been officially announced for the Forbidden Door pay-per-view. All this and more in today's AEW news. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. Of course, it's Wednesday. You know what that means. It's the final episode of AEW Dynamite on the road to Forbidden Door this weekend. And we could have some updates when it comes to injuries, people competing, people not competing, and a major title match which has been announced. So let's start off talking about all of these injuries. Of course, AEW's been hit with so many injuries recently, haven't they, when it comes to CM Punk, Bryan Danielson, Matt Hardy, Lee Johnson, Darius Martin, etc., etc. We're going to talk about all of them here. So injuries, and more injuries. That's the story of 2022 so far. Not just for AEW, frankly, but also WWE as well. Now, All Elite Wrestling has been dealing with a rash of injuries recently. That seems to keep sending plans off in different directions, new directions. They're having to work on the fly, change things, tweak things, as the company is working hard to maintain this momentum with this big event and other big events coming up, despite all of these speed bumps. Now, Fightful Select, Sean Ross Sapp published a report yesterday providing some updates on some injuries for the AEW stars, such as Lee Johnson, Matt Hardy, and Darius Martin. Now, Johnson, who hasn't wrestled since May, is said to be dealing with an unspecified knee injury, and sources stated that he's expected to be out of action for at least a few months. Now, Lee's last appearance saw him win a tag team match alongside Brock Anderson, son, of course, of Arn Anderson. Now, when it comes to Matt Hardy, he's also reportedly dealing with knee issues as well. Now, the report states that he was experiencing knee trouble after his match this past Saturday in Tijuana, where Hardy wrestled for AAA at the promotion's Triple Mania event. Of course, he teamed with Johnny Elite for one night only. Johnny Hardy, as they called him, for one night only. He replaced Matt's brother, Jeff Hardy. Of course, Jeff Hardy is having his legal issues right now, and obviously health issues, after his DUI arrest last week. Now, finally, sources are also hopeful when it comes to Darius Martin that he can return at some point near the end of the year, but nothing's, of course, is guaranteed. Now, of course, Darius Martin has had just the worst luck when it comes to injuries. He had a major knee injury. He came back, and then he was sidelined by a car accident earlier this year. But the news does give us a fuller picture of the limitations that AEW are currently dealing with when it comes to their roster due to these injuries. Now, injuries are part of pro wrestling, and sometimes these things kind of happen. Sometimes you just get injuries. People have injuries. I remember a time of WWE, it was in the mid-2000s, I believe it might have been 2006, 2007, they just got brutalized with injuries, and these things can happen. Of course, in addition to the injuries we've just spoken about, you've also got the current AEW World Champion CM Punk. He's recovering from foot surgery, leading to this creation of the interim AEW World Championship, which we're going to see determined this coming weekend at Forbidden Door. Adam Cole is also said to be recovering from injuries as well. Bryan Danielson recently missed a meet and greet as well as a flight due to an undisclosed injury, and there has been actually an announcement made when it comes to Bryan Danielson and his status, his health status, and it looks like some light's finally going to be shed on the injuries of Bryan Danielson on tonight's episode of AEW Dynamite on TBS, because AEW founder, president, CEO, head of creative, general manager, whatever you want to call him, he's got so many titles, Tony Khan took to Twitter yesterday and announced that the American Dragon will return this Wednesday to give an update on his health. Now, Danielson is expected to reveal whether or not he is cleared to compete at the Forbidden Door pay-per-view this Sunday or at the Blood and Guts episode of Dynamite the following Wednesday. Of course, Danielson hasn't been officially announced, but the expectation was he was going to be wrestling at Forbidden Door. The rumor was facing Zack Sabre Jr., and also the rumor was that he was going to be as part of the Blood and Guts match, obviously, of the Blackpool Combat Club and Eddie Kingston, Santana, and Ortiz against the Jericho Appreciation Society. Now, of course, Danielson has been out of action since the Anarchy at the Arena match at Double or Nothing on May 29. Now, at the time, original reports stated that Danielson would only be out of action for a couple of weeks. It was 1 to 2 weeks. I think it was Brian Alvarez that said that report. Well, obviously that's not accurate because Bryan Danielson appears to be still out of action. Danielson's nearly missed a month of action from this undisclosed injury, not just a week or 2 weeks. Now, if Danielson can make it to the pay-per-view this weekend, who his opponent will be, Recent signs point that it would be Zack Sabre Jr. He was specifically calling out Bryan Danielson after the New Japan Pro Wrestling Dominion events earlier this month. He said, can you take out your time out of the golfing schedule and face me? Of course, the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Award, the Bryan Danielson Best Technical Wrestler Award, it's been either won by Bryan Danielson or Zack Sabre Jr. I think they've wrestled once for Dragon Gate. This was when Bryan Danielson, or Daniel Bryan, got fired by WWE in that interim period before he came back. That was the situation there. As far as will Danielson wrestle, I don't know. My concern is, and this might be me, this is me speculating, so take this with a pinch of salt. I don't, have any good information on this or anything of that nature. But obviously, whenever Danielson's injured and they don't say a lot about it, it leads one to speculate about his prior injuries, which of course are concussions. Danielson, as far as I'm aware, since he returned from his enforced retirement, in-ring retirement in WWE in 2018, I believe has had a couple of concussions since then, not as frequent as before. We don't know if he's had any seizures or anything like that. And frankly, Danielson has explained quite a lot when it comes to the situation that he was having with WWE, which led to him being forced to retire. The main reason that he was forced to retire by WWE in 2016 was because he lied. That was the main reason why he was forced to retire. The situation is that he had got a concussion in the past and he had had a seizure. He had real bad post-concussion syndrome and he had had a seizure because of it. And they had found what they call a lesion on the brain. And the biggest issue with it is that he had lied to WWE about suffering the concussion, about suffering the seizure, and that led to the scans. And WWE felt that for what the situation was on his brain, and et cetera, they couldn't trust him. Now, obviously, he fought, and got himself eventually cleared by several doctors, including WWE's main doctor. So the main thing was that he had to be more honest, and I believe whilst he was in WWE, as I mentioned, he did suffer a couple of concussions. I think when that happened, it was kept quiet, but the reports were out there. Now, that's not to say that Danielson has suffered the same injury or suffered a concussion when it comes to AEW. We don't know. My speculation would be the fact that it's an undisclosed injury, and again, this is my opinion. I don't know whether this is to be accurate. This is pure speculation on my part, is that maybe he did get his bell rung in that Anarchy at the Arena match. It was a physical match, and it was Concussion City. It could have absolutely happened, and maybe it's just an overabundance of caution. This guy has had his issues with concussion in the past. He should be fine in 1 to 2 weeks. That's how long generally takes sometimes with concussions. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. If there's anyone that deserves an abundance of caution when it comes to a head injury, it's Bryan Danielson. And considering some of the scrutiny, the guys on the screen right there, Matt Hardy, when it comes to concussions in the past, do I have to say about when was it All Out in 2021 or 2020 rather, when he fell and hit his head, the Sammy Guevara thing? We don't need to see that again. Or it might have been Double or Nothing. I forget when it was. But we don't need to see that again. And AEW has to be cautious when it comes to it, especially with some of the matches that he's proposed to be in. Zack Sabre Jr. would largely be a technical wrestling match, and it would be completely different. But when you're talking about Blood and Guts, a War Games match, again, that's a very dangerous match for someone that's just coming out of a head injury. We're also looking at someone in Jeff Hardy, who reportedly, I don't know if he was on the way to a brain scan or was scheduled for a brain scan because he got knocked out at Double or Nothing as well. So maybe it's just been a case of this situation is taking a little bit longer to sort out. I would hope that because they've made this big announcement and Bryan Danielson's going to address it, that he's going to come out and say, I'm fine. Or maybe they had decided a couple of weeks ago that he was fine. Let's just build this up. Let's build some intrigue. I don't know. But we'll have to wait and see. And of course, we'll get an answer tonight. And of course, once Danielson does discuss his health on Dynamite tonight, we'll talk about it in tomorrow's AEW video. Now, speaking of Forbidden Door, another match has been announced, but it's a major one. It's a World Championship match. We don't know who will be challenging Switchblade Jay White for the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship at Forbidden Door in Chicago this Sunday, but we now know for certain that title will be defended. In a press release on Tuesday morning regarding Forbidden Door being shown in select movie theaters across the United States, AEW included the event's current card, listing White as defending the IWGP World Heavyweight title against an opponent yet to be determined. Now, this is the first official confirmation from AEW that the match will indeed take place. Now, White did appear last Wednesday on Dynamite on TBS in a segment with Hangman Page and Adam Cole. After laying out Page, White grabbed the microphone to proclaim, quote, "If I'm going to put my championship on the line at Forbidden Door, it's not going to be against you, buddy." White then informed Cole that he wouldn't be getting a title match either. Now, while commentator Jim Ross seemed to take White's statements as confirmation that the IWGP World Heavyweight title would be defended at Forbidden Door, White's specific verbiage left the situation slightly muddled, making AEW's theatrical press release a welcome clarification on the matter. Now, White, of course, has only held the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship for 9 days as of this recording, having defeated Okada to win the title at Dominion on June 12. Now, previous reports had suggested that Okada would be the one defending the championship against Page in singles action, or even against Page and Cole in a 3-way match. But then speculation has turned to a potential White, Cole and Page 3-way after White's victory, before White seemed to shut down the idea last week. Now, it should be noted, however, that while the press release seems to indicate a singles match, there are still any number of creative directions in which this story could go. Now, it must be said that some of the build, and I don't think it's particularly AEW or New Japan's fault, but some of the build to this pay-per-view has been kind of messed around, or feels a bit muddied or a bit uncertain. And I think, again, that's largely due to injuries and scheduling. We just don't, obviously Punk was meant to face Tanahashi. That's not happening. It looks like Okada, I guess, won't be wrestling, or he's not available. There was concern he was going to be available anyway, so it's Jay White defending the title. Logic would suggest he retains because he's only just won it, but I don't know. My hope would be that this event does happen again, because maybe some of those big dream matches that we had hoped would happen for the show don't look like they are going to happen. I mean, again, Bryan Danielson might be injured, and that's just very frustrating. Obviously, we know the situation with Ibushi, and there is so much. And I think when people thought of this super dream card, people had assumed that everyone was going to be available, and that doesn't look like it is going to be the case. So here's hoping this becomes an annual thing, and if it does become an annual thing, then maybe those bigger matches will happen next year. But still, nevertheless, it's going to be a big show, and certainly is a show that I'm very much looking forward to, it must be said as well. But anyway, guys, be sure to smash a like on the like button, be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.